Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today, a little bit past halfway of May, honestly closer to the end of May, but I'm going to be doing my updated 2026 Senate map prediction a little bit quicker than my more in-depth ones. We're going to be doing a very in-depth one around the 1st of June, but I just want to do a quick update on how I see the Senate map right now. Starting out, I'm going to do those states that I believe are safe for both the Democrats and Republicans. Democrats start out with 34 Senate seats based on the other two Senate election cycles. Republicans start out with 31. First, I'm going to do the states that I think are safe for the Democrats. These are going to be Oregon, Colorado. We have the state of Virginia, which Virginia was likely at the presidential level, but I do think it's going to remain safe at the Senate level. Illinois, depending on who the Democrats run, could potentially get under 15 points, but I expect in the 2026 midterm environment it will stay as safe Democratic. Delaware will be safe. New Jersey, the 2025 governor election will definitely not be a safe Democratic win, but the Senate race with Cory Booker will be a safe Democratic win. He has pretty high approval numbers. He'll win by more than 15 points in my latest prediction. Rhode Island, Massachusetts will be safe, and I believe that's going to be it for now for all the safe Democratic states. This gets the Democrats right around up to 42 Senate seats, only doing likely. Now the states that are safe for the Republicans. The bad news for the Democrats is there are actually a lot of states that I see being safe for the Republicans right now. Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota. Nebraska is a big if Dan Osborne, the independent, decides to run, which at this point it's 50-50 between whether he runs for the House district or not. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. Until I see otherwise, though, all the chatter I've heard is that he might be running for House against potentially Don Bacon because that may be the easier win opportunity for him. So if that's the case, I think Nebraska would remain safe Republican, but if Osborne were to run against the Republican Pete Ricketts, this race could become a lot closer than expected. Kansas, another one that could maybe be more competitive than initially expected, but I expect will stay safe Republican. Oklahoma, Alaska with Mary Peltola likely running for governor, I think it remains safe Republican. Arkansas, Louisiana, the question will be whether it'll be Bill Cassidy or another Republican at the top of the ticket. I know President Trump wants to primary Bill Cassidy out. We'll have to wait and see how that unfolds, but I would start Louisiana out still as safe Republican. Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina, I all expect will be safe. I also expect Ashley Moody to win Florida in a safe Republican margin as well. This puts the Republicans up to 48 senators. Democrats are at 42 with 10 remaining Senate seats to go. We do have some races that I have as being likely Democrat and likely Republican. These are Senate races I expect to be more than 5% wins, but less than 15% wins. Starting with the state of New Mexico, I have being likely Democratic at this time. New Mexico, we saw this race in 2020 go for the Democratic incumbent Lujan by 6.1% over the Republican Mark Ronchetti. Senate race from 2024, Martin Heinrich won by 10.1%. So it's possible New Mexico might vote around that 10 to 12% margin again in 2022, but I think we're going to see it be likely Democrat for sure, though. Could be safe, but I think it starts out as likely Democratic. And I think that's the only likely Democratic state at this time I have to go over. I do have some more Democratic states, but those are the only likely Democratic ones. Now for the likely Republicans. First off, I have the state of Iowa. This is Republican Senator Joni Ernst, who Iowa in 2022 voted for the Republican Chuck Grassley by 12.2%. That's under 15 points, a likely win. Iowa in 2020 was only Ernst plus 6.5, which is actually more competitive and close than many expected. Will the map be more like Ernst's 2020 map or the 2022 map of Chuck Grassley? We'll have to wait and see, but I don't think Iowa breaks 15% at this point in time in the midterm election. I think Iowa starts out as likely Republican. Now, I also think the state of Texas, for now, I'm starting out as likely Republican. This Senate race is really contingent on if John Cornyn or Ken Paxton is the nominee, because the early polls have actually shown Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, beating John Cornyn in the Republican primary, but also in a general election matchup shows Paxton doing much worse than Cornyn, even losing to the Democrats in the general election in some instances. Now, Texas does have a record now. The Senate voted for Ted Cruz in a likely Republican margin in 2024. Cornyn won it by a likely margin in 2020, though Cruz only won by 2.6% in 2018. It's not really too much of an overreaction to say that right now, if it's Ken Paxton versus Colin Allred or Beto O'Rourke, we might be getting more of a 2018 Senate map in Texas than a 2020 or 2024 one. We'll have to wait and see how that develops. But for Texas, for right now, I would put just a hair over lean Republican and start it as likely Republican. And I think this is going to be it for likely Republican as well. Now we have the 7 remaining Senate seats. And some of these are going to be lean Republican. Some of these are going to be lean Democrat. Some of these I'm going to put and leave just as toss-up and then go more in depth and talk about them a little more. First, we're going to go lean Democrat, and we're going to begin with the state of Minnesota. Now, Minnesota at the Senate level, in 2020, it voted for Tina Smith by 5.2%, literally just one hair or so over lean Democratic. In 2024, Amy Klobuchar did win by 15.7%, but I expect this race to be more competitive due to the fact the Democratic incumbent Tina Smith is retiring. And it's going to be a tough Democratic primary between Andrew Craig, Peggy Flanagan, and whoever else decides to jump into that race. On the Republican side of things, the Republicans only have Royce White, the nominee from 2024, running again. They really don't have a top-tier Republican candidate running or looking at running at this time that I think will make this race go to the Republicans. But Inside Elections has it as a battleground. Cook, Sabato, and Race to the White House all have it listed as lean Democratic. So I'm more of the mindset that I think this race starts out as lean Democrat, but by come election day, I could see this race easily becoming likely Democratic. That puts the Democrats at 44. Republicans are at 50. I have one more lean Democratic Senate seat, and this is the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire, which looked like it was starting out very, very close when Republican Governor Chris Sununu, or former Governor Chris Sununu, was looking at running. Right now, this is Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen. She is not running for re-election. U.S. Representative Chris Pappas is the only declared Democrat. He's going to be the Democratic nominee, and it'll be a very formidable one in the general election. The Republicans right now, their only Republican candidate that's expressed interest in running is Scott Brown, the former Massachusetts senator. He'll make this race competitive without a doubt. Inside Elections has it as battleground. Cook, Politico, and Sabato Crystal Ball have it as lean Democrat. Race to the White House has it as tilt Democrat. There hasn't been any hypothetical polling yet for Scott Brown versus Chris Pappas. The only poll from Shaheen versus Brown showed it a 10-point race. But I do think this race is going to be closer than initially some were saying early on, but now it seems like the polls have it as lean Democrat. The predictions have it at lean Democrat. I have New Hampshire right now being at lean Democrat as well. The state in 2022 voted for Maggie Hassan by 9.1%, and 2020 Shaheen won by 15.6%. But if you go back to 2016, Kelly Ayotte only lost to Maggie Hassan by 0.14%. So New Hampshire certainly could be very competitive come 2026, and I do think Scott Brown is a very formidable candidate for the Republicans to put up, but I do think the Democrats are favored to win in a lean Democratic margin at this time. This puts the Democrats up to 45, Republicans at 50. I now have one state that I currently have listed, at least for this part, as lean Republican. That is the state of Ohio. And Ohio, you may be a little surprised by this, because at the presidential level, we've seen Donald Trump win it now by likely Republican margins in three straight presidential elections. The Senate's been a lot more close. 2024, Bernie Moreno just defeated the Democratic incumbent Sherrod Brown by 3.6%. 2022, J.D. Vance only beat Tim Ryan by 6.1%. Likely Republican, but very, very close to not being likely Republican. And then in 2018, we saw Sherrod Brown win by 6.8%. The reason I'm being so cautious about the state of Ohio is the Democratic former incumbent senator, Sherrod Brown, is reportedly considering running for this race again. Sherrod Brown will be one of the best Democratic candidates in the state of Ohio to put up in 2026. Inside, Cook, Politico, and Sabato have it as either solid Republican or likely Republican, but the early hypothetical polling so far shows John Husted and Sherrod Brown in the most recent poll from the middle of April only at a 3-point race, which would be right along with the lean Republican margin. I think Ohio has the potential to get very close, but I still am starting it out lean Republican and on the side of caution that I think if it's Husted versus Brown, this race could get very close. This gives the Republicans 51 Senate seats, Democrats 45. Now we're into the remaining battleground Senate seats for 2026. These are the 4 states I expect to be the closest of this election. We have Maine, Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia. I'm going to start up north for the state of Maine. And Maine is really interesting. This is Senator Susan Collins. She is a Republican incumbent who typically is viewed as a more moderate Republican. She breaks with President Trump and with her party and frequently votes against many of President Trump's initiatives in the U.S. Senate, and that in this election may actually save her. Because if she were a pro-Republican in the state of Maine, likely she would not be winning. Angus King, the independent senator that votes for the Democrats, won by 17.4% in 2024. Susan Collins won in 2020 by 8.6% in another close election. At the presidential level, we saw Maine vote for Kamala Harris by 7 points. In 2024, voted for Joe Biden by 9 points. So again, presidential level, it's a likely Democratic state. At the Senate level, Maine's a lot more complicated. Susan Collins is also worth noting is the only Republican in a state that Kamala Harris won in 2024, the only Republican senator in a state that Harris won. Right now, what's interesting about this race, you would think Susan Collins would be very vulnerable and many Democrats want to run against her. So far, only one, Jordan Wood, is the only declared Democrat running against Susan Collins. A lot of the other Democrats have not yet jumped in this race or even expressed interest in potentially running in this race. It's like a lot of the Democrats, despite Collins supposedly being unbeatable or being vulnerable, honestly seem to be afraid to run against her, which to me says Susan Collins, despite what her approval numbers may say, may end up outperforming and winning this state of Maine in 2026. So right now, I actually think Susan Collins wins the state of Maine by a lean Republican margin. Closer margin than what I think Ohio ends up being, but I think Susan Collins right now, of these 4 Senate seats, is probably the best one for the Republicans to win at this point in time. Now we have the state of Michigan. Michigan's very interesting. This is another open Democratic seat. Gary Peters, the Democratic incumbent, is retiring. We have a very competitive Democratic primary going on right now. We're going to have to wait and see how that pans out and if any more Democrats like Michigan's Attorney General Dana Nessel get into the race. We're going to have to wait and see how that all goes. On the Republican side of things, Mike Rogers, the Republican former U.S. Rep and 2024 U.S. Senate nominee, is the only declared candidate. The only one that could throw a wrench in all this is U.S. Representative Bill Huizenga or Tudor Dixon, both of which are more, I would say, are more liked by the pro-MAGA wing of the Republican Party than Mike Rogers. At least on X, it seemed to be that way. They could potentially throw a wrench in the Republican primary. Hypothetical polling showed for Tudor Dixon versus Mike Rogers, Dixon leading closely in both polls. But the general election predictions for this race all have it as a battleground. Rachel White House has it as still a Democrat. The only poll of the candidates running have Rogers leading Haley Stevens at this time. Michigan's a very, very close state. It's an interesting state. Voted for Lisa Slotkin by 0.3% in 2024. In 2020, it voted for Gary Peters by 1.7%. In 2018, it voted for Debbie Stabenow by 18.5%. I think Mike Rogers gives the Republicans a real chance of winning this race, but I think Republicans also have a tough time in Michigan when Donald Trump is not at the top of the ticket. I think this race will be very close. The nasty competitive Democratic primary certainly could have hurt things for the Democrats in Michigan, but come Election Day, I think Michigan ends up going for the Democrats by under 1% at this time. It's going to be a very close race again, but I think around a 1-point victory for the Democrats is how I'm predicting Michigan going at this time. North Carolina, I just did a video on North Carolina a little bit ago today. This state is going to be absolutely fascinating because for North Carolina, all eyes are on Republican incumbent Thom Tillis, whose early approval rating numbers have not been very good. They've had him in the low 25 to 26% range for favorability rating. A lot of independents and Democrats don't like him, but a lot of Republicans also really don't like him for not being loyal enough to President Trump. And that may just be the Democrats' gain, where former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper has expressed interest in running, who left office with high approval numbers, and the most recent polling done for him also shows him having high approval numbers. The ratings for this one have it battleground to toss up in all 3, except for Cook Politico, who has it as lean Republican. The early hypothetical polling showed Thom Tillis losing to Roy Cooper in all 3 polls done so far, even though 2 of them have been Democratic polls. North Carolina at the Senate level is very, very close. It voted lean Republican in 2022 for Ted Budd. 2020, Thom Tillis only won by about 1.7%. 2016, the Republican won by 5.7%, but Tillis won 2014 by 1.6%. It is worth noting in both of Roy Cooper's governor bids, if you want to look at 2020, Cooper won by 4.5%. 2016, where he took down the Republican incumbent, he won by 0.22%. This race, I fully expect to be very close, to come down to the wire, but I think Tillis' approval ratings are actually going to hurt him more in this election than it did even in 2014 or even in 2020. I think Roy Cooper actually right now nearly defeats Thom Tillis, and Tillis' unpopularity being a large reason why, giving Democrats 1 U.S. Senate seat flip right now in the 2026 elections. Now we have the state of Georgia. Georgia's a fascinating state. This is Democratic incumbent Jon Ossoff. The Republicans were hoping to get Governor Brian Kemp to run against Ossoff to try and flip this seat red. He ruled out running. and now the Republicans are left scrambling, trying to find a Republican candidate they could run. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Andrew Clyde have already both ruled out running for this race, and now the Republicans who are running are Buddy Carter and John F. King are the two most notable. Rick Allens, Mike Collins, Tyler Harper, Rich McCormick have all expressed interest. There's also been some rumblings about Kelly Loeffler, Brad Raffensperger, Brian Jack, Doug Collins, and Greg Dolezal maybe running as well. Of these candidates, Brad Raffensperger is probably the most not pro-Trump Republican out of them all, but he'd probably be the strongest general election candidate. Kelly Loeffler was obviously the Republican nominee in 2020 who lost to Raphael Warnock. I don't know if her being at the top of the Republican ticket would be a good thing or a bad thing for the Republicans, but given the type of Republicans who are running at this point, she may even be one of the stronger Republican candidates, which could be a potential problem for the Republicans in this election. Right now, for the candidates who are running, it shows Ossoff leading over Buddy Carter and leading over John King. I'd say the early polls show Mike Collins is the strongest Republican at potentially taking down Jon Ossoff, but even then, Ossoff was leading against Mike Collins by about 5 points in the most recent Trafalgar poll. So no matter how you slice it right now, Jon Ossoff had a lead against pretty much every single Republican except for Brian Kemp. And I think with the predictions, 3 of them being toss-up, 1 being lean Democrat, Georgia's going to be very, very close. But right now, I think the numbers will get closer come Election Day. It won't be a 5-point win for Jon Ossoff, but I think the Republicans not being able to get Brian Kemp to help run for them is going to hurt them, where I think Jon Ossoff wins re-election by a very narrow, lean Democratic margin in the runoff election. I don't think Ossoff will break 50% on Election Day. I think they'll have to go to a runoff, and Ossoff will win by about 1.5% to 2%. Looking at the recent election results in the state of Georgia, Raphael Warnock won by about 2.8% in 2022 versus Herschel Walker. In 2020, Ossoff won by 1.2% versus David Perdue. Warnock won by 2.1%. That's after the presidential election. We just saw Donald Trump win in 2024 by 2.2%, and Biden won it by 0.2% in 2020. Very, very close. Georgia is still going to be very close, even without Brian Kemp. But now I think that Kemp is not running. I think the Democrats start out as the slight favorites. So my prediction for the U.S. Senate as of today for 2026 is the Democrats picking up 1 Senate seat from the current composition in the state of North Carolina, with very narrow holds in Georgia, Michigan, Minnesota, and New Hampshire. Republicans have a narrow hold in Maine and a potentially narrow hold in Ohio. This puts the Democrats at 48, Republicans at 52. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit like and subscribe, leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and hope to see you in a future video.